staying in the U.S., lawmakers have voted to raise the country's debt ceiling, narrowly dodging a disastrous default. The move gives the government room to borrow until 2023 after the midterm elections. Well, our business editor, Stephen Carroll, is here with me in the studio for more. Stephen, what exactly have politicians in Washington agreed on?
They've agreed to raise the government's borrowing limit by $2.5 trillion. The vote approved by the Senate and the House just hours before a deadline that had been set by the Treasury Secretary, where America could have ended up defaulting on its debts. The Senate passing the measure just 50-49. This was after a deal agreed between Republicans and Democrats last week, which allowed them to pass it by a simple majority. After this vote, the new US debt ceiling is going to be $31.4 trillion. This increase much bigger than the stopgap measure that was passed in October. The current national debt in the US, just under $29 trillion. That's where this room to borrow comes from. Essentially, the government has enough money to be able to borrow to meet its obligations now until 2023. That's the theory anyway. And that, of course, as you say, will be after the midterm elections.
And why do politicians in Washington have to vote on this issue so regularly?
So the US Constitution says that Congress must approve government borrowing. Since 1917, that's been more or less organised into what we now know as the debt ceiling. Most other countries don't have this sort of measure, which is why we hear about it almost uniquely in the United States. Raising the debt ceiling used to be routine. It's actually the 89th time that Congress has approved raising the debt ceiling since 1959. It's become increasingly politicised over the years, though. That's despite the potentially disastrous consequences if they didn't approve it and the US defaulted on its debts. In fact, it's estimated that the fact that we just have these brushes with the debt ceiling every so often cost hundreds of millions of dollars to the American economy. The evolution of the debt ceiling, which you can see on this graph, gives you an idea of how fast it's risen, particularly during the pandemic. We see that spike there towards the end of the graph as it's risen up towards that 31.4 trillion where it is now. It's grown, of course, under both Republican and Democrat presidents.
And this deal will be a relief to President Joe Biden, who's still trying to secure support for a major new spending plan.
Democrats are trying to push through President Biden's $1.75 trillion social spending bill. It's dubbed Build Back Better. They're trying to do it by the end of this year. It's already been passed by the House, but it needs every Democratic senator on board to pass in the Senate. One in particular is holding out. President Biden spoke to the Democratic Senator Joe Manchin on Monday. He says that he's still not ready to back it. Those talks are ongoing, but this really is important for Joe Biden. It's the flagship package of his economic plan. It includes hundreds of billions of dollars for childcare, introducing family leave for the first time in the US, money for housing, investment in clean energy, plus investment in healthcare as well. Would be largely paid for by taxes on the wealthy and on big business. Manchin's resistance, though, means they might not make that end-of-year deadline, but talks are ongoing. There's likely to be still some time to go in those discussions.
All right. Well, thanks for those business news updates. France 24, Stephen Carroll with me here in the studio.